April and I went to our room. Despite the warmth, I insisted on shutting the window and closing the curtains. I didn't sleep a wink. I never told anyone what really happened until now. When I read that story, my blood ran cold and all my hair stood on end. I'm still moving there this fall. Okay, so there's a pretty scary tale about Portland black-eyed children hanging out, floating down the street, terrifying people who are staying at a hostel. So, well, one of the things that I've always wondered is what would happen if you let the black-eyed kids in. I mean, are they gonna bake you some cookies? I don't know. I doubt it. But I have found a few reports of people who say that they have let the black-eyed children inside, and I'm gonna go ahead and give you one of those now. So this article is from Week in Weird. So here we go. The following chilling eyewitness account comes from a woman who emailed us to say that she made the mistake of letting the black-eyed kids inside her home, and now she claims she is paying the ultimate price. Her story comes as a warning to those willing to open their door more than a crack. I've edited the letter for grammar, redacted the identifying information, and slightly altered the introduction. But beyond that, the report is submitted exactly as it arrived. That's kind of a lot of altercations, but I see what he means. Or alterations. Honestly, it's the scariest BEK account I've ever read, according to the author of this article. I let the black-eyed children inside my house. Let me start by saying that I know how hard this all will be to believe. But now that things have taken a turn for the worse, I started looking for stories similar to mine and found Week in Weird. I feel like I should share this story with someone, and your website seems like the right place. I made the mistake of letting the black-eyed kids inside, and now I'm worried that I might die because of it. I hope this will be a warning to everyone who is ever in the position to make the same mistake that I did. I live just outside of a rural town in Vermont. It's a tight-knit community where everyone knows one another and people don't lock their doors at night. There has never been any need to. A little over a year ago, I woke up because I heard a loud banging on my front door. At the time, my husband lived in a small home on a dirt road just off the rural route into town. It was the middle of a snowstorm, and the nearby hills get very slippery in the snow, so I thought that someone might have been in an accident and broken down. It's happened before. When I looked out the window, I could see that that out-motion spotlight was on. I could see that there were footprints in the snow that had come from a road and into our driveway, but there was no car anywhere. The snow was still covering the road, and no one had driven on it for at least a couple of hours. Our front door was obscured from the window, but I could see that someone was standing there. I wasn't sure what to think, so I woke my husband up just to feel safer. While I was telling him what was going on, the banging on the door started again, and my husband went to answer it while I stood in the hallway. When he opened the door, there were two children standing in the snow, looking toward the ground. They were a boy and a girl, and could not have been more than 8 years old. They were dressed strangely, and had odd haircuts. The girl's hair was very long and straight, and the boy had a dated haircut that looked almost like a bowl cut. They weren't dressed for winter, and my first thought was they must have been Mennonite children, but as far as I know, there was never a large community of Mennonites near us. Thinking back on it now, that my normal reaction to seeing children in a snowstorm would have been to rush them inside and bundle them up with some blankets and hot cocoa, but that's not how this felt. The children were very unnerving. They would not make eye contact, and when my husband asked them if everything was okay, they asked if they could come in. My husband looked at me like, "What do I do?" and asked the kids where their parents were. "They'll be here soon," is all they said. It was around 2 o'clock in the morning. At this point, so the only reasonable thought in my head was that there must have been an accident or these kids got lost. As much as my instincts told me not to bring them inside, I did anyway. I went into the kitchen to make them some hot cocoa while my husband took them into the living room. While I was fixing the kettle, I could hear my husband talking to the kids. He was asking if they were okay, where they come from, how far they walked, if their parents' car was broken down, things like that. But they always answered, "Our parents will be here soon." They spoke in a sing-songy voice that they weren't afraid to be in a stranger's home at all. I started to notice that our cats were all hiding except Pigeon, who was in the kitchen with me. Normally our cats are very curious and friendly, and we have to be careful that they don't run out the door when we leave. This time none of them even tried to see who was here, which I thought was very strange. All the hair on Pigeon's neck was standing up, and his tail was puffed up while he looked into the living room. When I bent down to pet him and see what was wrong, he hissed and started growling and backed up until he had hid himself under the kitchen island. I had never seen him do this before. When I walked back into the living room, the kids were sitting on the couch as still as can be, but my husband was holding his head in his hands. I asked him what was wrong, and he just said that he felt very dizzy all of a sudden, but that he was fine. I turned back to the children to give them their cocoa, but when they looked at me, I gasped. It took everything inside of me not to drop the mugs and run away. When they looked at me, their eyes were completely black. They had no whites, just giant black pupils. When they saw that I was scared, they stood up and asked if they could use the bathroom. I tried to be as composed as I could be and showed them down the hall. They went into the bathroom together, and I hurried back to my husband to ask him if he had seen their eyes. He had seen them too, and said that it looked like his brother's badly bruised eyes after a car accident. We were in the middle of talking about whose children they could be when my husband's nose started to bleed. He'd never had nosebleeds as long as I had known him. I just knew inside myself that this had something to do with these kids in the bathroom, and I started crying while I ran to get my husband some tissues. That's when the power went out. Damn. I heard my husband yell my name from the living room, and as I started to walk back to the hallway, I stopped dead in my tracks. The two children were standing at the end of the hallway. They weren't moving, and I have never been so scared in my whole life. They just stood there in the dark. After what felt like forever, the boy said, "Our parents are here," and they walked to the door, opened it, and walked out, leaving it wide open. My husband jumped up to close it and almost fell over. We looked out the window and saw two men standing by a black car idling at the end of our driveway. The men looked like they were wearing black-colored suits and were very tall, at least 6 feet. When my husband waved at them, they just stared at us, got into the car, and drove off. Our power came on about half an hour later, but nothing was the same after that. Over the next few months, 3 of our cats went missing. We can only assume that they ran away somewhere and never came back, but the worst thing was coming home to find Pigeon in a puddle of blood on the living room floor. He looked like he had been vomiting blood. The vet told us that he had some kind of hemorrhage. After my husband's nosebleed became a regular occurrence, we went to see a doctor. He didn't know what to make of it other than dry nasal passages, but my husband was diagnosed with an aggressive skin cancer. When the doctor asked us if he used tanning beds, we both thought he was joking, but apparently this kind of melanoma is linked to overuse of indoor tanning. The doctors think he will recover, but don't understand how it got so bad so quickly. My husband has never worked an outdoor job and spends relatively little time in the sun. Since we let the black-eyed kids inside our home, I've also suffered from regular dizzy spells and nosebleeds on a regular basis. I've had other issues which I won't mention here, but trust me when I say that I'm suddenly in the worst condition of my life, and no one can do anything about it. I know that all of this because I let the black-eyed children into my home. We've told everyone we could about the strange kids that showed up that night, but no one else saw them, and some laugh at how scared we were of the Mennonite kids, but we know what we saw. I wish my husband had never opened the door. Feel free to publish this warning to others about the black-eyed kids. My advice would be to lock your doors, call the police, and wait for morning. Don't make the same mistake that I did. As I said, it's the most frightening report of the black-eyed kids I've personally read, and the first one I'm aware of that covers what happens to those unfortunate souls who let them in. Still, the story leaves us with more questions than answers. Who were the tall men that came to pick them up? Why were the cats so afraid of these children? Were they truly to blame for nosebleeds and cancer? Two interesting things that stand out immediately are the obvious resemblance of the tall men in dark suits to the notorious men in black encounters. And the second, the skin cancer diagnosis, some reminiscent of the radiation burns or moonburn syndrome commonly referred to by UFO witnesses. Could the black-eyed children be a part of an emerging trend in extraterrestrial contactee cases? Whatever the case, the warning remains the same. Don't let the black-eyed kids inside. Yes, indeed, do not. I mean, it's really a pretty nefarious scheme, considering that most people are very sympathetic and concerned towards children who are lost in the middle of the night. So it would be very easily to be duped by something like that. So that's why I say, if you see kids out there and they have black eyes, just cut out, forget about it. You don't need to get involved in that. But in any case, in any article or report or experience that I've come across where people have let the black-eyed kids into their house, it seems that they either end up dying, mysteriously vanish, or get really sick for long periods of time and eventually die or slowly recover. So it's bad news, really bad juju there for the black-eyed kids. And there's so much more that we could talk about. I mean, there are reports of this happening throughout history. It's not really anything new per se. It's just really gathered a lot of momentum, become another buzzword. A lot like Mercury retrograde, what we talked about last week on the show. So yes, we're coming down to the end of the show here, and we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. So hopefully you enjoyed this week's episode of the Electric Eye Radio Show, The Black-Eyed Children. Join us next week while we talk about something equally disturbing. You'll have to tune in to see what that is. Thank you very much. I'm Beazle B. Al-Hazred, and this is the Electric Eye Radio Show. Stay tuned.